everyone, welcome to another Procreate tutorial. This is the drawing that we will be completing in today's video. If you are new here, I mainly post Procreate tutorials, so if that's something you're interested in, go ahead and subscribe. Otherwise, before we get started, the only thing that you will need is the color palette, which I have linked in the description below. It's totally free to download. Just download it, open the file, and it'll automatically import the color palette into Procreate so that you can use the same colors as you follow along with the video. So take a second to go grab that and then come back and we will get started. First, let's set up our canvas. The dimensions that I'm using today are 10 inches by 10 inches at 300 dpi, and the color profile is this RGB with all the letters and numbers after it. It's the second one on the list for RGB colors. And then this is the color palette. I have the top row is all the mountains and the sky, and then the middle row is the bridge, and the last row is the train and some other stuff. So those are the way the colors are laid out. So first things first, we are on layer 1. So first things first, we're on layer 1. We're gonna grab this very first color in the color palette, this very dark blue, and we are gonna drag that color all the way onto the screen to create our background. Next, add a new layer on top of that one. And before we get started with everything, I just wanted to go over the main brush that we'll be using in the picture today. So it's under the airbrushing category. It's the hard airbrush, but I made a duplicate of the original. So to do that, you can just slide left on the original hard airbrush, click duplicate, and then a new one will pop up that has like a little symbol next to it so that you can tell it's the duplicate, and then click on it to open up the settings, and these are the settings that I have. So I turned the first one all the way down to 0 and then streamline up to 70. And that's going to be really important when we're making our hills and the steam on the train and whatnot. So make sure that you have this brush ready, and that will be the main one that we'll be using. So again, we are on layer 2. We're going to grab the second color in the color palette on the first row and grab that brush that we just created, the hard airbrush. We are at about 20% with it. And we are going to start drawing our mountains in the very background. So we're just going to make a two-sided pointed shape here. Let it snap to a perfect shape, and Procreate will make the lines perfectly straight. And then we're going to do a second one here, a little shallower. And then this one we're going to make a little more pointed again. And we'll make another one right next to it, similar to the first one. And then we have a little bit of room on the left side, so we are going to just draw a little straight line going off the page. And then we are going to drag that color below it to fill the entire shape. So this is what it should look like. Next, we're going to add a gradient to it. So go back into the layers menu, click on this layer, and then click alpha lock. And then go back into the color palette and select the third color on the top row. And using the same brush, we're just going to draw a line straight across horizontal. Touch your finger to the screen to make it snap to horizontal. We want it to be pretty close to the top of the mountains, but not all the way up there, and then drag that color below it to fill that part of the shape. Then click the wand tool and click Gaussian Blur layer, and we are going to drag to the right on the screen up to about 30% to make that nice and blended. And then staying on that same layer, same brush, same color, we are going to draw some little snow caps on top of the mountains. So since it's on alpha lock, it's only coloring on the shape that we created already. So just draw some squiggly lines towards the top of the mountains and then fill above them like this. Okay, and I'm going to use the arrow tool, turn on snapping and magnetics, and I'm just going to move this layer down just a little bit. So at this point, you just want to make sure that you have about 1/4 of the canvas showing towards the top of your mountain so that we have room to make our moon and our stars. Next, let's go back into the layers menu, add a new layer on top of this one. We're going to go into the color palette and select the 4th color on the top row. And using that same brush that we've been using, the hard airbrush copy, we are going to draw a little squiggly line across the page, fill it in below that line, and then this is going to be just a little bit below where the bottom peaks of our mountains are. And then we're going to go across and make some little pointed shapes that look kind of like trees in a very far distance and fill those in. So we're going to make these all the way across the page, make some of them shorter, some of them taller, but you can just make the pointed shape and then hold your pen down so that Procreate turns it into perfectly straight lines. Okay, next we're going to add a gradient to this one, so go back into the layers menu, click on this layer and click alpha lock. Go back into the color palette and select the 5th color on this row and then make another horizontal line across the page pretty close to the top of the hill and then fill below it. And then go to the wand, click Gaussian Blur, layer, and drag it up to about 30% again. Okay, and then go into the layer menu, add a new layer on top of this one, go into the color palette and select the 6th color on the first row, and use that same brush, and we're going to basically do the same exact thing again, making a new hill below the one we just created, fill that in, and then we are going to again draw our little trees all the way across. Okay, so now at this point, I'm going to select the 2 hills that I just drew and drag them up a little bit. I just feel like I need more room for the train, so I'm going to fill below this to fill in the rest of that shape there. But you want to make sure that the last hill that we just drew is about halfway between the top and bottom of the canvas. Second, to make some adjustments if necessary, and then go back into the layer menu, click on the last layer we just drew, turn alpha lock on, go into the color palette, select the last color on the top row, and then again drag a horizontal line across the hilltop towards the top of it, fill it in below, and then we are going to go into the wand, Gaussian Blur, layer, and drag it up to 30%. Okay, then we're going to add another new layer on top of that one, and we are going to start building our train tracks. So go into the color palette and select this first color on the 2nd row. And in order to set things up, we are going to turn the grid feature on. So go into the settings, make sure you're on canvas, turn on the drawing guide, click edit drawing guide, and the first selection is 2D grid. That's the one we're going to be using. Turn on drawing assist in the bottom right corner there, and then turn the grid size up until there are exactly 12 squares across your canvas. This is very important as we lay things out. When you have 12, make sure that you can see your grid by changing the color. I selected like a whiter color and then click done. Go into your layer menu and it should say assisted under the layer that we're on. And then we are going to grab the selection tool, set it to rectangle and color fill. And again, we are on this first color on the 2nd row here. And we are going to draw a rectangle across this square row that is the 3rd square up from the bottom. So fill that entire row in with your rectangle tool, like so. Next, go into the layers menu, add a new layer, click on it and drag it below the layer that we just created. Click on it and click Drawing Assist, and then grab the rectangle tool. And so we are going to draw the pillars here, and we're going to first do the second and third squares. Then we're going to leave 2 spaces and do the next 2 squares, and then 2 spaces and the next 2 squares. So there should be 1 square on the right, 1 square on the left, 2 squares in between, and you can draw your rectangle so that it's under the bridge part that we created, the horizontal one. And then I had a little gap here, so I'm just going to fill that in, and that is the base for our bridge. Next, go into the layers menu, add a new layer on top of our top layer, and we are still using the same color from the color palette. And then our brush, we are using the hard airbrush, but we are going to turn the size down to about 10%. And in the layers menu, click the layer and turn Drawing Assist on. What we're going to do is draw a line straight across the canvas about 1/3 of the way up on this next square above the bridge part that we just drew. And then we are going to draw a straight line up and down following each square across the canvas as well. So this is where the Drawing Assist comes in handy. It helps you draw perfectly up and down lines and perfectly horizontal lines. I guess we didn't really need Drawing Assist to draw the other parts of the bridge where we use the rectangle tool, but it's very helpful here. So do that all the way across following the guide. Okay, so now we're going to add some details to our bridge, some shading and whatnot. So let's go back into the layer menu, find the first bridge layer, the big pillar parts, add a new layer on top of that, turn it into a clipping mask, and then grab the second color on the second row of the color palette, go into our brushes, and we are going to switch to under charcoal, the to be compressed at about 35%. And we're just going to lightly draw towards the top of these pillars where it meets the horizontal part of the bridge. And I push a little harder at the very top where it meets the horizontal piece so that it's a little darker right there. Okay, so next we're going to add a new layer on top of the horizontal part of our bridge and turn that into a clipping mask. Go into our color palette and select the third color on the second row. And using that same charcoal brush that we had before, we're going to lightly color the top section of this horizontal part of the bridge. Okay, and then we are going to add a tiny bit of glow to our railing. So go into the layers menu, add a new layer on top of that very top layer, which is the railing, turn it into a clipping mask. And then we are going to also turn on Drawing Assist. And then go into the color palette and select this third color on the last row. It's the lighter yellow, and then go into the brushes and go back to the hard airbrush. And we are just going to, since Drawing Assist is turned on, it's going to help us get a perfectly straight across line. We only wanted to touch the very tippy top of this railing, so try a few times at the edge until you see it hit the railing just a smidge and then drag it all the way across the screen. Make sure that your entire railing is showing when you start drawing so that you don't have to go back and like lift your pen up again and try to do it again if you go off the screen. Go back into the layers menu and click on that layer and turn Drawing Assist off, and then grab your eraser and click on the eraser so that you can change the type of eraser, and we're going to find the to be compressed charcoal again. Turn the size to about 20, and we are going to just very, very lightly erase all the way across this just to make it look a little more realistic and not so sharp. Okay, next we are going to add a new layer on top of this one, and we are going to go back into the settings, so click the gear icon, click on Edit Drawing Guide, and we're actually going to switch to Symmetry instead. So click Done there, and then Go into our color palette and select the first color on the last row, go into the brushes and select hard airbrush, and we are at about 15 to 20%. And what we are going to do is actually draw a circle. This is going to give us the rounded edges to our train cars. And where we want it is, if you look at the symmetry line, we want it 1.5 rungs over on our railing. So it's right in the middle of that second rung to the left, or the second space. And we're going to fill that in, and then go back to our layers menu, make a duplicate of this layer, click the arrow tool, and then make sure that snapping and magnetics are turned on. And we're just going to drag it straight down, and it should cover up the horizontal part of the bridge just a little bit so that we can still see the roundness of the edge there. And then we are going to go back to the layers menu and drag those two layers together so they're on the same layer now. And then we're going to use our brush tool, and we are going to make a perfectly vertical line connecting these two circles. So touch your finger on the screen to make it perfectly vertical, and then drag it around if you need to make sure it's not sticking out anywhere. And then we're going to do the same thing on the top, make a perfectly horizontal line by touching your finger to the screen, and let it connect to the other side. And then do the same thing across the bottom that we did to the top. This one doesn't matter as much because it's going to be hidden by the bridge, but fill that shape in, and that is our train car. Before we move on, we're going to make some adjustments to our layers. So open up the layers menu, and we're just going to move some of these around. So select the railing plus its highlight clipping mask, drag that below the horizontal part of the bridge, and turn this one into a clipping mask. So we're going to unclip that, reclip this one. So it should go the pillars and its clipping mask, the railing and its clipping mask, and then the horizontal bridge part and its clipping mask. And then this train car that we just drew, we are going to drag down below the railing as well. Make sure to turn that off of clipping mask if it automatically does that. So this is how it should look. The train should be behind the railing and behind the horizontal part of the bridge. Now in our layers menu, add a new layer above our train car, and then click on the layer and turn on drawing assist. We're going to use symmetry here. Go to the color palette and select the first yellow on the last row. And then we're going to use the hard airbrush still, but let us turn the size up to 25 to 30%. And we're going to draw a line just to the left of our symmetry line, not quite halfway to the next rung on our railing here. And we're just going to draw a horizontal line across the bottom. Touch your finger to the screen to make it perfectly straight and perfectly horizontal. And then we are going to draw a line straight up from that and then straight over to connect them. But this is how it should look. We want a good amount of room on the top of the window and then a good amount of room on the bottom. You should be able to just see the window peeking under the railing there, so you can see a little bit of the bottom of the window. After you're happy with your window shape, go into the layers menu, make a duplicate of the window, click the arrow tool again, make sure magnetics and snapping are on, and we're just going to drag this one to the left. Try to make sure there's about the same amount of room in between them and the edge, and then do the same thing, make another copy and drag it all the way to the right, and just try to make sure they look evenly spaced out. Then go into the layers menu and drag these 3 layers together so that all windows are on the same row. Make a duplicate, select the bottom one, and then go into the wand, click Gaussian Blur, layer, and drag that to about 10%. Next, we are going to add some highlights to the train. So go back to the original dark blue layer, add a new layer on top of it and turn it into a clipping mask, and then go into the color palette and select this last color on the last row, this light blue. And then for our brush, we are switching back to the charcoal brush to be compressed at about 25%. And we're just going to lightly drag this all across the top of the car. And then I'm going to push down a little bit harder right at the very top to make the color a little thicker there. Okay, so that is our train car. So we are going to go into the layers menu and we are going to select those 4 layers. So the car, the highlight, and then the 2 window layers, group those together. And then duplicate that group, select the first one, click the arrow tool, make sure snapping and magnetics are turned on, and we're going to drag it all the way to the left. until there's just a little bit of space in between the two cars. And then we're gonna drag them, select them both, and then drag them to the left even more since we need some more room in the front. So we should see a little bit of space on the very edge and then a little bit in between them. And then select the one group again, make another duplicate, and we are going to drag that one all the way to the front and leave about the same amount of distance in between those cars as well. Okay, now we need to make some adjustments to the first car. So we are going to go into the layers menu and delete the layer that has the glow on it. So it's the bottom window layer. So then select the main window layer, use the selection tool, have it on rectangle with color fill turned off, and drag to select the first two windows of the car and drag those off the screen to get rid of them. Then go back into the layers menu, and we are going to use the selection tool on this window that's remaining, put it on freeform, drag the right side of the window to the left to make the window skinnier. Then go back into the layers menu, make a duplicate of this window layer, select the bottom one, click the wand, Gaussian Blur layer, and then drag that up to about 8%. Next, go back into the layers menu and select the original dark blue train car in this group, and we're going to make some changes to that. So go to the selection tool, make sure rectangle is turned on but color fill is turned off, and we are just going to make a selection right next to the window all the way across the train car, but leave part of it above the railing showing. So just take out this little chunk here off the screen to get rid of it. So then we're going to grab our eraser tool, and we want to make sure that the eraser is on the hard airbrush that we use for our other stuff, and the size is going to be at about 15%. And we're just going to lightly erase this edge here to make it rounded. So just in a little circular motion. And then we're going to do the same thing on the front of the train here. Okay, next I am just going to hold my finger on the screen to select this original color of the train car, and we are going to go to the layers menu and turn drawing assist off on this layer, but we're drawing on the same layer still. Go back to our brushes and select the hard airbrush again, and we are going to move this to about 20%, and we're just going to draw some straight lines up and over and down. Hold your finger on the screen to make them perfectly vertical and horizontal, and we're just going to add a little one here, a little one next to it. And then we're going to add a bigger one in the front here, while still leaving a little room on the train in front of it. So there's just these shapes spread out across the top here to add to our train car. And since the little highlights that we made on the top of the car are a clipping mask, you can see that those show up as you draw towards them. So we do see them mostly on this front one that's taller. Next, we are going to go back into our layers menu, add a new layer, and drag it below the train car that we just created, and it'll pop outside of that group. Go back to the color palette, select the third color in the second row, the light yellow, and then we're just going to draw a straight up and down line in front of the train car with a little of it hidden beneath the train car on the left side there. And that was just with our hard airbrush still. And then go back to the layers menu, add a new layer, and then drag that below the light we just created. Go back to the color palette and select the other yellow, the darker one. Just draw a straight line angled kind of upwards coming out from behind the light, and then drag and then fill it in below all the way down to the bridge. Then go back to the layers menu, click the N, and drag this down to about 70% for the opacity so you can see it got a little lighter. And then with that layer selected, go back to your eraser tool and find the 2B compressed charcoal again, and that is at about 25%, and just lightly erase some parts of that, mostly towards the top of the light, to just kind of give it some texture. Now we're going to make the steam or fog or whatever you want to call it. So go back to your layer menu, and we are going to add another new layer, drag it below the light just for organizational purposes. On the color palette, we're going to select this last color on the last row, and we're going to use our hard airbrush again. And we can go to the settings menu and turn off the drawing guide. We don't need to see that anymore. And our brush is at about 15%. And we are just going to draw a squiggly line coming from this front little pipe that we just drew. So we're just going to draw it straight up from there and then squiggle it off the page behind our train cars, and then draw another one underneath it, following a similar pattern. Make sure it's connected at the front and then fill that shape in. Okay, awesome. Then we are going to open our layers menu again, click on the N on this layer to change the opacity, and we're going to drag that down to about 80%. And then we're going to grab our eraser tool again and do a similar thing that we did to the light. So we are going to make sure it is on the to be compressed charcoal at about 30%, and we are just going to lightly erase mostly the underside of the fog that we just drew. So just add some erasers in there to give it some more texture and make it look more realistic and more fun. Okay, there's just one more thing we're going to do to the background here before we move on to the sky. So go back into the layers menu and find that last hill that we just drew, the darkest hill. Add a new layer on top of that, so behind the bridge and everything. And then we are going to use that same color we used for the steam and go to our to be compressed charcoal for our brush at about 30%. And we're just going to lightly draw side to side behind the bridge and the train just to add some texture here. Okay, lastly, we're going to add some moon and stars to the sky. So find the original dark blue layer that we created as the very background and add a new layer on top of that. The color palette and select this first yellow on the last row. Grab the selection tool, change it to ellipse, and turn color fill on. And we are just going to draw a circle in the upper left part of the sky here. Touching your finger on the screen does not make it a perfect circle, but just get it as close as you can to looking like one, and then let it fill in. Then we are going to click the selection tool to turn it off, click it again to turn it back on, and then turn color fill off. And we are going to start in the upper left and draw another circle right on top of our moon, and then select that with the arrow tool and drag it off the page to get a crescent shape. So take some time to get a good crescent shape that you like. Mine was a little big, so I downsized it just a bit. Then go to the layers menu and make a duplicate of this moon layer. Select the bottom one that pops up, and we are going to go back to the color palette, select the last color on the last row and fill that in. You won't really be able to see it, but that's just going to be our blur in the background. Add a new layer on top of that one, and using the hard airbrush and the same color that we just filled the moon in with, we are just going to draw some little stars all across the sky. Make some of them bigger, some of them smaller, spread them out however you'd like, and add as many as you'd like. Okay, and when you're done, we are going to go into our layers menu, make a duplicate of the star layer, and then the bottom star layer and the light blue moon, we're going to merge those two layers together. And then on that layer with that one selected, click on the wand, Gaussian Blur layer, and drag that to about 10%, 8%, somewhere in there. And that adds a little glow to our sky, and that completes our picture today. So I hope you had fun. This was one of my most requested tutorials ever. I really enjoyed making it, so I hope you did as well. If you would like to share your finished drawing on Instagram, please do so and then tag me so that I can see how it turned out. And while you're there, go ahead and give me a follow so that you can see what I'm working on next. If you want to see more tutorials, please subscribe to my channel, and I promise there will be a lot more in the future. Thanks for watching!